What if everything you think you know about Amelia Earhart's disappearance is wrong? In 1937, the world's most famous aviator took off from Papua New Guinea in her silver Lockheed Electra 10E and vanished into the Pacific. For nearly 90 years, we've been told it was a tragic accident, a brave woman lost at sea, her plane swallowed by waves and time. But what if that's not what happened at all? Because somewhere in government archives, declassified cables and island testimonies tell a different story. One of surveillance, secret landings, and a cover-up that stretched from the White House to the Japanese-occupied islands of the Pacific. Villagers claimed they saw her captured. Others swore they met a mysterious woman held on Saipan who looked exactly like the missing pilot. And long after the official search was closed, strange radio signals continued to echo through the static faint, desperate a voice calling for help. Amelia Earhart wasn't just an icon of flight. She was a symbol of independence, courage, and defiance in a world that still doubted women could soar. And maybe that's exactly why the truth about her end was never meant to be found. They said she ran out of fuel. They said she crashed and sank. But the truth about what happened to Amelia Earhart might be far more extraordinary and far more disturbing than history ever dared to admit. The 1,930 seconds were an age of limits. Limits of technology, of gender, of imagination. The world was still recovering from the Great Depression. War clouds were forming over Europe and the Pacific. Air travel was dangerous, experimental, and dominated by men. And then came Amelia Earhart, fearless, brilliant, and utterly unlike anyone the world had ever seen. She wasn't just a pilot, she was a movement. Born in Kansas in 1897, Amelia grew up chasing adventure, climbing trees, building homemade roller coasters, defying every rule her era tried to impose on women. While others were told to marry and settle down, she looked to the sky. Her first flight at age 20 changed everything. As soon as we left the ground, she later said, I knew I had to fly. By the early 1,930 seconds, she had become the face of possibility. She was the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. She set records across the world, wrote best-selling books, and became an icon of courage. But behind the public admiration was something more complicated, a woman used as both a symbol and a tool. Sponsors wanted her image, the press wanted her story, the government wanted her example. Amelia's fame wasn't just about flight, it was about power, gender, and politics in an era desperate for heroes. Her marriage to publisher George Putnam blurred those lines even more. He saw in her both a partner and a product, promoting her as Lady Lindy, the female Charles Lindbergh. But Amelia herself wanted control of her legacy. She dreamed of something far greater, a flight around the world, not just as a stunt, but as a statement proof that a woman could do what no man had done before. By 1937, she was at the height of her fame, elegant yet restless, celebrated yet cornered by expectation. Her planned circumnavigation of the globe would make her immortal, but it also placed her in the center of a geopolitical chessboard that few understood. Because her route from South America to Africa, across Asia and the Pacific, wasn't just a daring adventure. It passed directly over strategic military zones, territories under surveillance, as Japan expanded its empire across the Pacific. Some believed Amelia's flight was more than just a record attempt, that she was gathering intelligence, intentionally or not. The 1st of June 1937. Amelia Earhart and her navigator, Fred Noonan, lifted off from Miami in their gleaming Lockheed Electra. The press called it the last great flight. She called it the trip of a lifetime. No one could have imagined it would become the greatest mystery in aviation history. Amelia Earhart's final flight was meant to be the crown jewel of her career, 29,000 miles around the world, a route that would stretch the limits of both machine and human endurance. But from the very beginning, it seemed cursed. Her first attempt, westward from California, ended in disaster when her plane ground-looped on takeoff in Honolulu. The Lockheed Electra was damaged, and Amelia narrowly escaped injury. Newspapers whispered that she was losing her nerve. But she refused to quit. With the aircraft repaired, she tried again, this time flying eastward, chasing the sunrise instead of the sunset. By June 1937, Amelia and her navigator Fred Noonan had already crossed Africa, India, and Australia, surviving mechanical failures, monsoon rains, and exhaustion. They had just one final stretch to conquer, the Pacific. Their next stop was Howland Island, a speck of coral in the middle of the ocean, barely large enough for a runway. From there, they'd continue to Hawaii, then home. On July 2nd, 1937, the pair departed from Lae, Papua New Guinea. The world listened. The U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca was stationed near Howland, ready to guide them in by radio. But something went wrong. Amelia's transmissions came through faint and frantic. "We must be on you, but cannot see you. Gas is running low. We are flying at 1,000 feet. Then silence. The largest search in naval history up to that time began within hours. 66 aircraft, 9 ships, and over 250,000 square miles of ocean were scoured. Nothing. No wreckage, no bodies, no clues. It was as if the Pacific had swallowed her whole. The official report called it death by disappearance. The world mourned. The U.S. government declared the flight a tragic accident caused by navigational error. President Roosevelt offered condolences. Her husband, George Putnam, refused to give up, funding private searches for months, but each time returned empty-handed. And yet, from the very beginning, the evidence didn't fit. Radio operators on distant islands reported hearing distress calls days after the disappearance, faint female voices begging for help. "This is Amelia Earhart. We can't last much longer." Locals on Nikumaroro Island claimed to see a silver plane overhead, then smoke from a crash. On Saipan, several witnesses decades later swore they saw 2 foreigners, 1 man, 1 woman held by Japanese soldiers. Could Amelia have landed alive and been captured? It was an idea dismissed as fantasy for decades. But in the late 20th century, new discoveries began to challenge the official story. Skeletal remains on Nikumaroro, pieces of aircraft metal matching the Electra, even classified memos suggesting the U.S. Navy may have known more than it ever revealed. For the public, Amelia Earhart's disappearance remained a mystery. For those who studied it, it began to look like something else entirely, not an accident, but an erasure. For more than 8 decades, Amelia Earhart's disappearance has been treated as aviation's greatest mystery, a tragedy without villains. But when you look closely at the details that don't fit, it begins to sound less like a mystery and more like a cover-up. Let's start with the radio transmissions. Officially, Earhart's final message came at 8:43 a.m. on July 2nd, 1937, after that silence. But dozens of civilian radio operators across the Pacific reported hearing faint signals for days afterward. Some described a woman's voice repeating, "We are on the reef. Help us." The U.S. Navy investigated and dismissed the claims as imagination. Yet later analysis showed those operators were tuned to frequencies Earhart's Electra could have transmitted. Then there's Nikumaroro Island, 350 miles southeast of Howland. In 1940, British officers discovered skeletal remains there, along with a woman's shoe, a sextant box, and fragments of a plane. The bones were sent to Fiji for analysis, then lost. At the time, the examiner claimed they belonged to a man. But in 2018, forensic re-examination of the original data suggested otherwise. The bones matched the physical profile of a Caucasian woman of Earhart's size. And yet, that's only one theory. Others point north toward Saipan, in what was then Japanese territory. Locals on the island later swore they saw a woman and a man, foreign and frightened, captured by Japanese soldiers around the time Earhart vanished. One elderly witness even claimed to have seen her executed. When U.S. Marines liberated Saipan in 1944, some said they found documents and even aircraft parts linked to her. Those records vanished into classified archives soon after. Why would anyone cover that up? The most provocative theory suggests Earhart's flight wasn't just an adventure, it was a covert reconnaissance mission. The Pacific in 1937 was a tinderbox of military tension. Japan was expanding, the U.S. Navy was quietly mapping routes, and a famous civilian flying around the world offered perfect cover for aerial photography and radio tests. If Amelia was caught crossing into restricted airspace or landing in Japanese territory, her capture would have been a political nightmare. The U.S. government, some argue, had every reason to stay silent. Declaring her a hero lost to the sea was easier than admitting she'd been left behind. But maybe the darkest theory of all is the most human one, that she survived, returned home under another name, and lived in anonymity to protect others. In the 1,970 seconds, an elderly woman in New Jersey, Irene Bolam, was accused of being Earhart. She denied it fiercely. But facial analysis, handwriting comparisons, and flight logs kept the legend alive. Even after her death, some experts said the resemblance was beyond coincidence. Could Amelia Earhart, the most famous woman in the world, have quietly lived out her years while history wrote her off as dead? Every theory sounds impossible until you remember who she was. She once said, "Adventure is worthwhile in itself." But what if her final adventure was one history wasn't ready to believe? Maybe Amelia Earhart didn't vanish. Maybe she was erased by politics, by fear, or by a truth too dangerous for her time. From this channel's perspective, the story of Amelia Earhart is not just a mystery about where a plane went down. It's a story about how history decides which truths are worth telling and which ones are easier to forget. Amelia was more than a pilot. She was a symbol, a woman who refused to be grounded in an age when women weren't supposed to fly, speak, or dream beyond what society allowed. Her disappearance didn't just mark the end of a life, it marked the beginning of a myth that may have been carefully crafted, edited, and preserved to protect the powerful. If you strip away the legend, what remains is deeply uncomfortable. A U.S. government that may have known more than it ever said. A media machine that preferred the clean tragedy of Lost at Sea over the messy truth of espionage, politics, and betrayal. And an industry that still profits from her name, the fearless heroine frozen forever in time, rather than the complex, intelligent woman she truly was. What makes Amelia's story timeless isn't the mystery, it's the silence that surrounds it. The same kind of silence that has followed so many other icons, from Natalie Wood to Marilyn Monroe, whose endings didn't fit the narrative Hollywood or history wanted to tell. It's possible that Amelia crashed. It's possible she was captured. It's even possible she lived, hidden in plain sight. But the deeper question is, why does the world need her to stay missing? Maybe because her disappearance is more powerful than her survival. Maybe because heroes are easier to worship when they're gone. Or maybe because if the truth came out that governments lied, that history was rewritten, it would shatter the illusion of control that nations and legends both depend on. Amelia Earhart's story forces us to ask, how much of what we know is actually true? How many of our heroes are myths built from partial truths and convenient lies? And what does it say about us that we prefer the mystery over the reality? She once wrote, "Courage is the price life exacts for granting peace." Maybe her courage wasn't just in flying across oceans, but in challenging a world terrified of what she represented. A woman who couldn't be controlled, silenced, or defined by anyone else. There's a photograph taken in 1937, just weeks before she vanished. Amelia Earhart stands beside her silver Lockheed Electra, wind tugging at her flight jacket, a half smile on her face. Behind her, the sky stretches open and endless. Looking at it now, you can't help but feel it, that quiet defiance, that sense that she belonged not to the earth, but to the air. She once said, "Everyone has oceans to fly, if they have the heart to do it." Maybe that's the truest thing she ever left behind. Because Amelia's story was never really about a plane or a crash site. It was about freedom, about the courage to leave safety behind and chase something greater. In a world that told her no, she became living proof of yes. Even her disappearance became a kind of rebellion, one final act of mystery that refused to be contained or explained. Decades later, her shadow still crosses the sky. Every search expedition, every documentary, every rumor keeps her alive in a way few heroes ever are. She became a myth not because she vanished, but because she transcended the line between truth and legend, blurred by time and wonder. Maybe she crashed into the sea. Maybe she landed on a silent island. Maybe she was captured. Or maybe she simply kept flying, beyond the maps, beyond the world that tried to define her. Whatever the truth, Amelia Earhart will always represent the same impossible idea that some souls are born not to arrive, but to keep going. Some stories were never meant to be known. But now, you know,